The harsh forge of a medieval winter gather close, dear listener, and let us plunge into the frozen heart of a medieval winter. A season not merely a backdrop to life, but a relentless adversary that wove itself into every thread of existence. In the year 1263, deep in the heart of a distant age, winter was no fleeting inconvenience, but a brutal crucible, shaping every choice, testing the limits of body and spirit, and forging communities through the shared weight of survival. Let us wander the snow-laden paths of Thornwick, a humble hamlet of 30 souls nestled in a valley cradled by frost-dusted hills, where ancient oaks and gnarled pines stood sentinel against a greying sky. Here, every breath was a defiance of the cold, every act a testament to the unyielding will to endure. This journey will carry us through the trials of a season that demanded everything: preparation, resilience, ingenuity, faith, and the fierce bonds of humanity, to emerge, battered but unbowed, into the hard-won dawn of spring. Through the lives of Thornwick's people, Edric the farmer, Aeliana the weaver, Father Cedric the priest, young Wulfric the apprentice, old Agnes the storyteller, and others, we will witness the crucible of winter and the spark of humanity that burns within it, their stories interwoven like threads in a tapestry of survival. The foreboding, shadow of winter's approach. In Thornwick, the first whispers of winter stirred long before the snow began to fall, creeping into the valley like a thief in the twilight. Autumn's vibrant cloak, leaves of crimson, gold, amber, russet, and burnt orange, withered into brittle husks, their colours leaching into the ashen pallor of impending cold, carpeting the forest floor in a crunching shroud. The air grew sharp, biting at exposed noses and fingers, each breath forming fleeting clouds that hung like ghosts in the chill dawn, their edges shimmering in the weak sunlight. The villagers, their faces weathered by sun and toil, moved with purposeful urgency, their hands calloused from years of labour, their backs bent under the weight of survival. The harvest, their fragile shield against the lean months ahead, was gathered with meticulous care. Every sheaf of wheat, every knobby turnip, every sack of oats or barley, every dried apple, pear, quince, or handful of beans, was a precious bulwark against the spectre of starvation that loomed like a shadow across the hamlet, its presence as palpable as the frost that coated the grass each morning, turning it into a crystalline carpet that snapped underfoot and clung to worn boots. The sky, heavy with clouds swollen with the promise of snow, hung like a stern overseer, its grey expanse unyielding as it judged Thornwick's preparations. Winter was no gentle visitor. It descended with the ferocity of a ravenous beast, its icy claws piercing every corner of life. From the humblest peasant's hovel, patched with mud, straw, and desperate hope, to the stone-walled manor of Lord Alfric, perched on a low hill overlooking the hamlet, where wealth offered only a thin veil of protection, no one escaped its reach. Unlike the modern world, with its insulated homes, glowing hearths, and well-stocked pantries, the medieval era offered no such reprieve. Cold seeped through gaps in wooden walls, frosted the edges of coarse woolen blankets, and settled into the very marrow of those who endured it. The wind, sharp as a freshly honed blade, whistled through cracks, chilling homes to their bones, rattling shutters and stirring the straw on dirt floors. The frost painted intricate, mocking patterns on the insides of shutters, as if to taunt the villagers with beauty they could not touch, their delicate tracery a cruel contrast to the hardship within. The river thorn, once a lifeline for fishing, washing and trade, slowed to a sluggish crawl, its edges icing over with jagged crystals, its surface reflecting the grey sky like a mirror of despair, its flow stifled until spring's distant thaw. Villages like Thornwick became isolated outposts, cut off by snowdrifts, that swallowed paths and turned roads into treacherous quagmires of mud and ice. Travel was a perilous gamble, often impossible until the distant promise of spring. Messengers, peddlers, and pilgrims vanished from the roads, their absence leaving hamlets to fend for themselves in a silence broken only by the howl of the wind, the creak of ice-laden branches, or the distant cry of a hungry wolf prowling the forest's edge. The silence was profound, a heavy blanket that smothered the usual sounds of life. Cartwheels rumbling over ruts, laughter from children playing, the clink of coins in a market that no longer existed, the chatter of traders bartering wool for salt. Every preparation, every log stacked in towering piles beside each hovel, every sack of grain stored in damp cellars beneath packed earth, every scrap of cloth mended with coarse thread, was a calculated act of defiance against a season that offered no mercy. The villagers knew that winter was a relentless foe, its trials as much a part of life as the breath in their lungs. Each exhale a visible prayer in the frigid air, curling upward like a plea to the heavens. The work of survival began months in advance, under the fading warmth of late summer, when the sun still cast long shadows across the fields. Edric, a broad-shouldered farmer with hands like oak roots, led the men in the fields, their bodies glistening with sweat as they reaped crops beneath a still generous sun. The rhythmic swing of scythes and sickles filled the air, their blades glinting as they cut through stalks of barley, rye, and wheat, the golden heads falling in neat rows like soldiers yielding to an unseen army. The men sang as they worked, their voices rough but steady, old songs of harvest and hope that carried across the fields, a counterpoint to the rustle of stalks and the chirp of crickets. Women, led by Eliana, a weaver whose sharp eyes missed no flaw, sorted and cleaned the harvest, their fingers deft as they separated chaff from grain, peeled blemished vegetables to preserve their core, or braided onions and garlic into ropes for storage. Their hands moved with a rhythm born of necessity, their chatter a blend of practical advice: how to spot rot in a turnip, how to tie a knot that wouldn't slip, and quiet prayers for a bountiful yield. Eliana, her auburn hair tucked under a linen cap, worked alongside her sister-in-law, Cinneberg, their hands brushing as they sorted peas, their laughter a fleeting moment of lightness amid the toil. Children, like young Wulfric, an apprentice to the carpenter Godric, darted through the fields, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves, gathering fallen apples, gleaning stray grains, or bundling kindling into small, manageable piles. Wulfric, barely 12, with a mop of straw-coloured hair and a grin that belied his hunger, prided himself on his speed, racing his sister Ethelfled, a wiry girl of 10 with eyes like her mother's, to collect the most apples, their competition a spark of joy in the grind of labour. Ethelfled, quick and stubborn, often won, her basket brimming with bruised but precious fruit, her taunts met with Wulfric's good-natured scowl. Their mother, Eliana, watched them with a mix of pride and worry, knowing each apple was a day's sustenance in the months ahead. The children's hands, though nimble, were scratched and dirtied by thorns and rough bark, yet their contributions were vital. Each grain or twig a step towards survival, their small voices echoing with songs they'd learned from their elders. Barns and cellars were filled with whatever could be spared: dried peas, lentils and fava beans, salted fish or pork, their surfaces gritty with precious salt. Wheels of hard wax-sealed cheese, their rinds yellowing in the dim light. Barrels of pickled cabbage, beets or turnips, their briny scent sharp in the nose. And jars of honey, their golden contents a rare sweetness in a world of scarcity. The air in the cellars grew heavy with the earthy scent of roots, the sharp tang of fermentation, and the faint mustiness of stored grain, a reminder of the fragile abundance they sought to preserve. Eliana oversaw the women's work, her voice steady as she directed the packing of barrels, her hands checking each seal for cracks. Her memory haunted by last winter, when a barrel of cabbage had rotted, leaving her family to survive on watery gruel for weeks. She taught Ethelfled to press the cabbage tightly, her daughter's small hands mimicking her own, their shared labour a quiet bond. The elderly, like old Agnes, their faces carved with the wisdom of winters past, sat by smoky fires, recounting tales of lean years when hunger claimed entire families. Agnes, her voice hoarse but commanding, her eyes still sharp beneath a crown of white hair, spoke of the winter of '92, when the snow buried the village to the eaves and the wolves grew bold, stealing into Thornwick to snatch a lamb from its pen. Her stories were both warning and ritual, a reminder to leave nothing to chance, to check every knot, every seam, every store with meticulous care. She told of her own childhood, when her mother taught her to weave straw into baskets, her fingers bleeding but her resolve unbroken, a lesson Agnes now passed to Ethelfled, her gnarled hands guiding the girls. The villagers listened, their eyes wide, their hands busy with tasks, mending nets with hemp twine, sharpening tools with whetstones, carding wool with wooden combs, as they absorbed the lessons of survival, their fingers moving in time with Agnes's words. In the weeks before the first frost, Thornwick buzzed with a frenetic energy that bordered on desperation, the hamlet alive with the hum of preparation. Women boiled vats of tallow, their hands slick with grease as they moulded candles, each one a precious defense against the long nights ahead. The flickering light of a single candle could mean the difference between a task completed, sewing a torn cloak, spinning wool into thread, repairing a broken sledge, and one abandoned to darkness. Eliana, her fingers nimble despite the chill, poured tallow into moulds carved from wood by Godric, her daughter Ethelfled twisting wicks from flax, her small hands trembling with effort but glowing with pride when her mother nodded approval. Men, led by Edric, repaired roofs, patching leaks with straw, clay, or salvaged wood, their hands caked with earth as they worked against the ticking clock of autumn's end. They reinforced walls with extra layers of mud or wattle, their breath steaming as they laboured in the cooling air, their laughter a defiant counterpoint to the wind's growing bite, which carried the scent of pine and coming snow. Livestock were herded into sturdy pens or small barns, their survival as critical as any humans. Edric checked his cow, Bess, with care, rubbing her flanks to keep her warm, knowing her milk would sustain his youngest, little Bjorn, a frail boy of 4 whose cough already worried his mother, Sineberg. Edric's 2 pigs, their bristles coarse, grunted in their pen, their slaughter a distant hope for meat to see the family through the hunger gap. Eliana tended the chickens, coaxing them to lay with extra handfuls of grain, their eggs carefully collected and stored in straw, each one a treasure Ethelfled guarded like a secret. The village's few horses, vital for ploughing and hauling, were blanketed with old sacks, their hooves checked for cracks by Godric, who whispered to them as he worked, his voice soothing their restless snorts. The blacksmith, Oswin, his hammer ringing late into the evening, sharpened plough blades, axes or scythes, or forged new nails, hinges and hooks to replace those worn by the season's demands. His forge glowed like a beacon, its heat drawing children and stray dogs to linger, their faces lit by the fire's glow, their shadows dancing on the walls. Even the children, too young to fully grasp the stakes, were tasked with gathering moss to stuff into cracks, fetching water from the thorn before it froze, or collecting pine cones, twigs and bark for kindling. Wulfric and Ethelfled raced to fill baskets with pine cones, their breath puffing as they scrambled through the forest, their rivalry a game that lightened the labour. Wulfric, his cheeks red from the cold, boasted of his haul, only to laugh when Ethelfled tripped him with a stick, her giggle echoing through the trees. The elderly, like Agnes, taught them small but vital skills: how to twist straw into rope for binding sheaves, how to spot edible berries or mushrooms beneath the frost, how to listen for the crack of ice that signaled a weak spot in a frozen river or pond. Agnes, her hands gnarled but steady, showed Wulfric how to carve a simple trap from willow branches, her patience a quiet gift as she corrected his clumsy cuts. The village was a hive of activity, each task a thread in the tapestry of survival, each person a vital stitch. Father Cedric, the priest, his robes threadbare but his voice steady, led prayers for a mild winter. His words a balm to anxious hearts. The community gathered in the small wooden church, its walls drafty, but its presence a reminder of shared purpose, as they lit candles, sang hymns, and offered alms of grain, wool, or dried herbs to the altar, hoping to appease both God and the season. The preparation extended beyond the physical, to the spiritual and emotional. The villagers fortified their spirits, sharing stories of past winters survived, of ancestors who outwitted the cold, of miracles that brought warmth to frozen hands. These tales, told in the fading light of autumn, were as much a part of their arsenal as the grain in their cellars. Old Agnes recounted the tale of her grandmother, who saved her family by weaving a blanket from nettles when their wool ran out, her hands bleeding but her resolve unbroken. A story that brought tears to Ethelfled's eyes as she listened, her own hands busy with a spindle. Edric shared stories of his father, a hunter who tracked a stag through a blizzard, its meat feeding the village for a month, his courage a beacon for his son. The women wove rush mats to cover floors, their fingers weaving patterns that spoke of hope. Spirals for renewal, crosses for protection, knots for strength. Eliana, her eyes sharp, wove a mat with a pattern of interlocking circles, a silent prayer for her family's unity, her hands trembling as she thought of Bjorn's cough. The men carved runes or simple symbols into door frames, circles for unity, lines for endurance, triangles for the Trinity, small acts of faith that winter's wrath might pass them by. The children, under Agnes's watchful eye, learned to carve simple flutes from reeds or to braid cords from hemp, their small creations a spark of joy in the gathering gloom. The hamlet's animals were not forgotten. Edric checked his cow, Bess, and his 2 pigs, ensuring their pens were secure, their straw fresh, their water unfrozen. Eliana tended the chickens, coaxing them to lay with extra handfuls of grain, their eggs carefully collected and stored in straw, each one a small victory. The village's few horses, vital for ploughing and hauling, were blanketed with old sacks, their hooves checked for cracks. The dogs, lean and alert, were fed scraps to keep their strength, their barks a warning against wolves or foxes. Even the cats, half wild and slinking through the shadows, played their part, keeping rats from the grain stores, their silent hunts a quiet contribution to survival. Every creature, human and animal, was part of Thornwick's fragile ecosystem, their survival intertwined in the face of winter's onslaught. The hamlet's preparation was a communal effort, each family contributing to the whole. The miller, Godric, repaired his mill's wheel, knowing that grinding grain would be vital if any stores survived to spring. The carpenter, also Godric, mended broken carts and reinforced shutters, his hammer a steady rhythm against the wind. The healer, old Hilda, gathered the last of the autumn herbs, yarrow, chamomile, feverfew, and horehound, drying them over her fire, her hands trembling, but her knowledge sharp, her voice murmuring remedies as she worked. The children learned to recognize the signs of winter's approach, the way the wind shifted from west to north, carrying a chill that bit the skin, the way the stars grew clearer in the cold night sky, their light sharp as ice. the way the animals grew restless, their lowing and bleating a warning of coming storms. Father Cedric blessed the stores, sprinkling holy water on the granary and barns, his prayers a shield against despair, his thin frame shivering as he walked through the snow to each home. The village was a living organism, its pulse quickening as winter loomed, its people bound by a shared purpose, to survive. But preparation was not without tension. Edric clashed with his neighbour Leofwin over a shared woodpile, each accusing the other of taking more than their share, their voices rising until Cinneberg's sharp reprimand silenced them. Eliana mediated, her calm words easing the feud, but the strain lingered, a reminder of how scarcity could fray even the tightest bonds. The children too felt the pressure. Wulfric overheard his parents' worried whispers about the dwindling grain, his young heart heavy with a fear he could not name. Yet these tensions were tempered by necessity, the village's survival hinging on cooperation, each family knowing their fate was tied to their neighbours. The relentless struggle to endure. The medieval year was cleaved into two stark realities. The season of growth, when fields bloomed with wheat and rye and livestock thrived on green pastures, and the season of endurance, when survival hung by a fragile thread. Winter was the latter, a time when every resource was stretched to its breaking point, every decision a gamble with life itself. The hearth was the heart of every home, its fire a flickering lifeline that demanded constant tending. Wood, gathered through back-breaking labour in warmer months, was hauled to Thornwick in creaking carts or on weary shoulders, each log a treasure. Edric had spent spring and summer felling trees with his blunt axe, his arms aching as he split logs with wedges and mauls, his hands blistered from dragging timber through muddy trails. His son, Wulfric, followed behind, carrying smaller branches, his small frame straining but his resolve firm, determined to prove his worth. By autumn, the woodpiles stood tall, often reaching the eaves of the hovels, but never tall enough, their depletion a constant worry as winter deepened. A single miscalculation, a pile too small, a fire left untended, could mean a frozen night, a risk no family could afford. Cinneberg banked the fire each night, her hands careful as she arranged the embers, her prayers whispered for warmth to last until dawn. Families crowded together, their bodies pressed close to share heat, their breath mingling in the chill air. In the poorest homes, like that of Eliana and her husband Leofwin, the boundaries between human and animal blurred. Livestock, cows, pigs, chickens, goats, even a single precious horse, were brought indoors, their snuffling presence crowding the cramped, smoky spaces. Bess, Edric's cow, lowed softly, her warmth a necessity, her milk a lifeline for little Bjorn, who clung to his mother's skirts, his cheeks hollow, but his eyes bright with a child's unyielding hope. The pigs, their bristles coarse, rooted in the straw, their slaughter a distant hope for meat to see the family through the hunger gap. The chickens, clucking nervously, roosted in corners, their eggs a rare source of protein, each one collected with care by Ethelfled, who whispered to them as if they were friends, her voice a soft comfort in the gloom. The goats, nimble and stubborn, nibbled at anything within reach, straw, cloth, even the edge of a blanket, their milk a bitter but vital sustenance. The horse, shared by the village for ploughing, stood in a corner of Godric's barn, its breath steaming, its strength preserved for spring. Their warmth was a necessity, their survival as critical as any human's, but their presence also brought filth, fleas, and the risk of disease, a trade-off born of necessity. The smell of damp wool, animal dung, smoke, and unwashed bodies filled the air, a constant reminder of the closeness of life and death. Food was the cornerstone of survival, yet it was under constant siege. In the waning days of autumn, Villagers had worked tirelessly to preserve their harvest, their hands raw from labor. Meats were smoked over smouldering fires of oak, applewood, or hazel, their surfaces blackened to ward off decay, the smoky scent clinging to clothes and hair, a reminder of the labor that went into each strip. Eliana stood over bubbling cauldrons, stirring brine or tending fires, her face flushed from heat and effort, her hands steady as she packed pork into barrels, her thoughts on her children's hungry eyes, what little salt they could afford, gritty, impure and costly, traded from a peddler who passed through in September, was used to cure pork, fish or mutton, a luxury beyond the reach of many. Eliana bartered a woven shawl for a small sack of salt, her heart heavy as she parted with the cloth she'd spent weeks crafting. Fruits like apples, pears, plums, quinces and sloes were dried in the fading sunlight, spread on wooden racks or hung in garlands, their flavors fading with each passing week, their texture toughening into leathery morsels. Eliana taught Ethelfled to slice apples thinly, ensuring they dried evenly, her voice soft but firm as she corrected her daughter's technique, their shared task a moment of connection amid the strain. Herbs, thyme, sage, rosemary, parsley, dill, mint, lovage, and fennel were hung in bunches from rafters, their brittle leaves a faint echo of summer's bounty, used sparingly to flavor meager meals or soothe ailments. Eliana tied the herbs with care, her fingers brushing the leaves, their scent a fleeting reminder of warm days. Root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, carrots, beets, onions, radishes, and leeks were buried in straw-lined pits or stored in cool, damp cellars, their earthy tang a lifeline when other stores ran dry. Edric dug the pits himself, his spade biting into the earth, his sweat mixing with the soil as he ensured each root was safe from frost. Grains, wheat, rye, barley, oats were ground into coarse flour, baked into dense loaves that grew harder with each passing week, their crusts sometimes mouldy but eaten nonetheless, the villagers scraping off the green patches with knives or teeth. These methods, though time-tested, were imperfect, vulnerable to mold, vermin, or simple miscalculation. Mice and rats gnawed at sacks, their droppings a constant threat to precious stores. Dampness crept into cellars, rotting roots or sprouting grains. Eliana checked the stores daily, her heart sinking as she found a sack of barley nibbled through, its contents scattered like lost hope, her hands trembling as she swept up what she could salvage. By midwinter, granaries stood nearly empty, their contents rationed into meagre portions of watery gruel, thin broth, or hard coarse bread that barely silenced the gnawing hunger in bellies young and old. Eliana measured each spoonful with care, her eyes meeting Leofwin's as they silently agreed to skip their own portions to feed Ethelfled and Bjorn. Their hunger a silent sacrifice. The men, like Edric, chewed slowly, savouring each bite, their eyes fixed on the fire as if willing it to warm their insides, their stomachs growling even after a meal. The children, like Wulfric, felt the hunger most keenly, their growing bodies craving more than the sparse meals could provide, their complaints hushed by their parents' weary glances. The dreaded hunger gap, that bleak stretch from late winter to early spring, loomed over every household like a spectre, its shadow lengthening with each passing day. With stores depleted, a new crop still locked beneath frozen earth, desperation drove families to grim measures. Some, like Godric's family, ground tree bark, birch, elm, or pine, or acorns, chestnuts, or hazelnut hulls into bitter flour, its texture gritty and its taste a mockery of sustenance. Cinneberg, her hands shaking, pounded acorns with a mortar. her children watching with wide eyes as she mixed the bitter powder into a thin porridge. Others, like the widow Mildred, boiled leather shoes, belts, harnesses, or even old parchment into a tasteless broth, hoping to extract some nourishment from the tough hide, their teeth aching as they chewed the softened scraps. Foraging for frostbitten weeds, nettles, wild garlic, dandelion roots, or even frozen clover beneath the snow became a daily ritual. Each frozen sprig, a small victory against starvation. Wulfric, his fingers numb, dug through snowdrifts with a stick, his heart leaping when he found a clump of nettles, their sting a small price for the soup they'd yield, his triumph shared with Ethelfled as they carried their find home. The weakest, children like Beorn, the elderly like Agnes, the sick like Leofwin's brother Alwyn, who coughed through the night with a fever that wouldn't break, suffered most, their bodies unable to withstand the relentless depletion of energy and warmth. Beorn's cough grew worse, his small body shaking as Aeliana held him close, her prayers mingling with Hilda's herbal remedies, her heart heavy with fear. Agnes, her breath shallow, fought pneumonia, her eyes bright with defiance despite her frailty, her stories still flowing to keep the children's spirits high. In some hamlets, the community pooled their scraps, creating communal pots of stew that stretched meagre ingredients into shared meals. But even these were often little more than flavoured water. The bones boiled until they yielded no more flavour. Edric organised one such meal, his voice firm as he rallied the village to share a single pig, its meat a fleeting gift that warmed their bellies for a night. Water itself became a scarce treasure. The thorn froze into an unyielding slab, its surface mocking the villagers' crude iron tools, picks, chisels, or sharpened sticks. Melting snow over precious fires was a laborious task, each bucket a costly expenditure of wood that might otherwise warm a shivering body. Aeliana stood by the hearth, her hands red from stirring snow in a blackened pot, her eyes watering from the smoke, her thoughts on Bjorn's fever. The choice was brutal: burn fuel to thaw water and risk depleting reserves, or conserve the wood and endure thirst in a world already parched by cold. In some households like Edric's, snow was eaten raw, its icy bite a small price to pay for hydration. But this carried risks: illness from impure snow, contaminated by ash, animal waste, or soot from nearby fires, or the slow sapping of body heat that could lead to hypothermia. Some villagers, in desperation, drank weak ale, cider, or the whey from cheese-making, its faint warmth a fleeting comfort, though its scarcity made it a rare indulgence. Edric shared a small cup of ale with his family on Christmas Eve, their first taste in weeks, its bitterness a reminder of better days, their shared sips a moment of unity. The tools of survival were as varied as they were ingenious. Aeliana spun wool into thread, her fingers numb as she worked her drop spindle, knitting or weaving it into thick socks, scarves, mittens or blankets, each stitch a barrier against the cold. She taught Ethelfled to knit, her daughter's small hands fumbling but eager. Her first scarf a lumpy but heartfelt gift for Bjorn, who clutched it like a talisman. Edric crafted snowshoes from willow branches and leather strips, enabling him to hunt or check traps in the deep snow, his steps crunching through drifts that reached his knees, his breath a steady rhythm as he scanned the forest for signs of game. Traps set for rabbits, foxes, or the occasional deer were checked daily. Though the animals were as hungry as the villagers, their numbers thinned by the harsh season. Wulfric, learning from Godric, carved a new trap, his knife slipping once and nicking his thumb. The pain a lesson in patience, his pride swelling when the trap caught a rabbit, its meat a rare feast. Fire starting was an art, with flint and steel, firebows, or even lenses crafted from ice used to coax sparks from damp tinder, a task that could take hours in the bitter cold. Agnes taught Wulfric to strike a spark, her hands guiding his, her voice calm despite the wind's howl outside, her lessons a lifeline in the dark. The village adapted in countless small ways. Edric carved wooden clogs for his family, their soles reinforced with scraps of leather to keep feet dry above the snow. Eliana wove baskets from reeds to store kindling or dried herbs, their tight weaves protecting against damp. Wulfric and Ethelfled learned to recognize the tracks of game in the snow, their sharp eyes spotting the faint marks of a hare or squirrel, their discoveries shared with Edric, who praised their keen senses. Oswin, the blacksmith, repaired broken tools or forged new ones, shovels for clearing snow, hooks for fishing through ice, needles for sewing, his forge a rare source of warmth, its glow a beacon in the night. Hilda, the healer, mixed salves from beeswax and yarrow to soothe frostbitten skin, or brewed teas from dried chamomile to calm coughs. Her hands trembling, but her knowledge sharp. Her voice a steady murmur as she worked. Every skill, every tool, every scrap of knowledge was a weapon against winter's relentless assault. But survival was not without conflict. Leofwin, weakened by hunger, grew short-tempered, snapping at Eliana when a pot of gruel burned, their argument echoing in their cramped hovel until Ethelfled's quiet sobs silenced them. The village's shared resources sparked disputes. When Mildrith accused a neighbour of stealing from the communal grain store, Father Cedric intervened, his calm words restoring peace, but leaving a lingering mistrust. These tensions, though painful, were fleeting, the villagers' need for each other outweighing their grievances, their shared struggle a bond stronger than any quarrel. The grueling toll on body and soul. The cold was more than discomfort. It was a thief of life. Thornwick's homes, built of timber, wattle, and daub, were no match for winter's assault. Gaps in walls invited the wind's biting kiss, and windows, when they existed, were covered with oiled cloth, parchment, or wooden shutters that blocked both light and cold. The interiors were plunged into a dim, smoky haze, the air thick with the scent of burning wood, unwashed bodies, animal dung, and the faint tang of mildew. Floors of packed earth grew damp, chilling feet even through layers of straw scattered for insulation. Chilblains reddened and cracked skin, leaving hands, feet, and ears raw and painful, the sores weeping in the damp air. Eliana's hands, once soft from weaving, grew red and cracked, each movement a stab of pain as she sewed, her fingers leaving faint bloodstains on the cloth. Frostbite was a graver threat, claiming fingers, toes, noses, or even ears with merciless efficiency, turning them black with no remedy but the crude slice of a knife in unsanitary conditions. Leofwin's cousin, Alwyn, lost 2 toes to frostbite, his cries echoing as Godric cut away the dead flesh, the wound festering despite Hilda's salves, his pain a constant reminder of winter's cruelty. Respiratory illnesses thrived in the damp, crowded quarters. Pneumonia, bronchitis, and consumption, tuberculosis, spread easily. Their symptoms worsened by the cold, malnutrition, and the constant inhalation of smoke from poorly vented fires. Infants and the elderly, winter's easiest prey, were particularly vulnerable. Bjorn's cough grew worse, his small body shaking as Eliana held him close, her prayers mingling with Hilda's herbal remedies. Willow bark tea, honey-soaked onions, elderflower infusions, her heart heavy with fear as his fever lingered. Agnes, her breath shallow, fought pneumonia, her eyes bright with defiance despite her frailty, her stories still flowing to keep the children's spirits high, her voice a beacon in the dark. The elderly, their bodies worn by years of toil, often slipped away quietly in the night, their breath slowing in the cold until it stopped altogether. Their passing was marked by shallow graves dug in half-frozen ground with picks, shovels or bare hands, the earth resisting every strike, the villagers' hands bleeding as they worked. Father Cedric led brief funerals, his voice cracking as he blessed the dead, the community mourning but turning quickly to survival, their grief a luxury they could not afford. The isolation of winter was its own torment. Snowdrifts buried roads, and the frozen thorn halted trade, tidings, and travel. Thornwick stood alone for months, its people reliant solely on their own dwindling resources and ingenuity. A broken bone, a fever, or a complicated birth became a death sentence when no healer could be reached. Mildred's daughter Edith, pregnant and frail, lost her child to a difficult labour. Hilda's skills not enough without proper tools or warmth, her screams haunting the village for days. News from neighbouring villages, marriages, births, deaths, or word of a distant war arrived only in spring, if at all. This solitude bred a stoic acceptance. Winter would claim its due, and all one could do was pray to be among the spared. Yet it also fostered a fierce self-reliance, as families learned to mend their own tools with fire-heated iron, doctor their own ailments with salves of lard, herbs, or mouldy bread, and bury their own dead in the frozen earth. Godric became a surgeon, setting Wulfric's sprained ankle with splints of wood. Hilda became a midwife, easing fevers with cool cloths. The children became sentinels, watching for signs of wolves or strangers in the snow, their shouts a warning to the village. The psychological weight was as heavy as the physical. Endless grey days and long dark nights eroded the spirit, fostering a melancholy that settled like frost over the heart. Tempers flared in cramped, hungry homes, where the constant proximity of family members grated on frayed nerves. Edric and Cyneberg argued over a spilled bucket of water, their voices sharp until Bjorn's cough silenced them, their guilt a heavy weight. Aeliana and Leofwin clashed when Bjorn's fever worsened, each blaming the other for not rationing the firewood more carefully, their words cutting until Ethelfled's quiet sob brought them back to their senses. Despair crept into the silences, its presence as palpable as the cold. The church offered flickers of hope. Christmas, with its promise of Christ's light, brought a modest feast of ale, bread, and a small piece of smoked meat. The villagers gathering in the church to share the meal, their faces lit by candlelight. Candlemas, with its candles symbolizing the return of warmth, lifted spirits with its rituals of light and prayer, Father Cedric's voice steady as he blessed each flame. Yet the weight of hunger, cold, and darkness made such promises feel distant, like stars obscured by storm clouds, their light faint but persistent. The long nights were filled with sleepless worry. Edric lay awake, counting the days until the next slaughter could provide meat, his mind racing with fears of a failed hunt. His hands clenched as he imagined his children's hungry eyes. Aeliana, her hands still from sewing, stared into the fire, worrying over Beorn's cough, her heart heavy with the memory of her sister, lost to fever 2 winters past, her tears silent to avoid waking Ethelfled. Children, like Wulfric and Ethelfled, sensed the tension, their dreams haunted by the howling wind, the growls of their own empty stomachs, or the shadows cast by flickering fires. Wulfric dreamt of wolves circling the village, their eyes glowing in the dark, waking with a start to check the door's latch. Agnes, her body frail but her mind sharp, bore the weight of memory. Winters that had taken her husband, her son, her friends. Each lost a scar that ached in the cold. Yet she carried the knowledge of survival, passing down remedies, skills, and stories that kept hope alive. She taught Ethelfled to brew nettle tea, her voice a steady anchor in the storm, her stories of spring's return a lifeline for the girl's weary heart. The psychological strain was compounded by the monotony of winter's tasks. The daily grind of fetching wood, melting snow, feeding livestock, and repairing torn clothing wore down even the strongest spirits. Eliana spent hours grinding grain by hand, her shoulders aching as she turned the heavy quern, the coarse flour dusting her hands like snow. Edric trudged through snow to check traps, his boots soaked, his hands numb, knowing a failed hunt could mean another day of hunger. Wulfric and Ethelfled, confined indoors, grew restless, their energy a challenge in cramped spaces, their games of knucklebones or tag a fleeting escape from the gloom. To combat the despair, families turned to small rituals, singing folk songs about brave knights or bountiful harvests, telling riddles to sharpen weary minds, carving simple toys from scraps of wood. Wulfric carved a small boat for Bjorn, its sails a scrap of cloth, his brother's smile a rare reward. The unyielding spark of resilience. Yet amid this crucible of hardship, the human spirit burned with defiance. The long nights birthed stories, tales of heroes who vanquished frost giants, of saints who warmed frozen hearts, of ancestors who survived winters worse than this one. Around dying fires, families wove narratives that bound them together, their voices a shield against despair. Agnes recounted the tale of the great winter of '92, when the thorn froze solid enough to walk across, and the village survived by sharing a single cow's milk, each family taking only what they needed. Edric told of his father's hunt, tracking a stag through a blizzard, its meat feeding Thornwick for a month, his courage a beacon for his son. The children, like Wulfric, crafted games from sticks, rags, bits of bone, or frozen clumps of snow, their laughter a fleeting rebellion against the gloom. Wulfric carved a wooden horse for Bjorn, its rough edges smoothed with care, his gift a spark of joy in the dark, his brother's delight a moment of triumph. Women, like Eliana, were the unsung architects of survival. They stretched every scrap of food, coaxing meals from dwindling stores with a skill born of necessity. A single onion, a handful of dried peas, a crust of stale bread, or a bone from last week's stew became soups that warmed both body and soul. Eliana's soups, flavoured with a pinch of sage or thyme, were a quiet miracle, their warmth easing Bjorn's cough, their scent filling the hovel with a fleeting promise of plenty. They mended tattered garments, stitching patches over patches until cloaks were more thread than cloth. Each repair a quiet act of defiance. Eliana donned Leofwin's cloak, her needle flashing in the firelight, her hands steady despite the cold, her thoughts on her husband's weary smile. They tended the sick with remedies passed down through generations, herbs like feverfew, chamomile, yarrow, horehound, or mint steeped in precious hot water, or poultices of mustard, lard, and garlic applied to aching chests. Their prayers, whispered over sleeping children or dying elders, were as much a medicine as any herb, a plea for strength in a season that offered little mercy. Eliana taught Ethelfled to knead dough, to sew, to soothe a fever, her hands guiding with a patience that belied her own exhaustion, her voice singing lullabies to calm restless children. Community was a lifeline, a tapestry of shared survival. Neighbours shared hearths and sparse meals, pooling warmth and companionship. Winter visiting saw families gather in the warmest home, trading tales, songs, riddles, or silent companionship to lift weary spirits. Mildrith, the widow, shared her last loaf with Eliana, knowing the favour would be returned when her own stores ran dry, their shared meal a moment of grace. Godric mended a neighbour's broken sledge, his skill a currency more valuable than coin, his quiet nod a promise of solidarity. Hilda delivered a child in a neighbour's hovel, her hands steady despite the cold, her presence a beacon of hope, her skill ensuring the survival of both mother and babe. The church, led by Father Cedric, was a beacon of hope, its drafty walls a gathering place for light and prayer. The Feast of Epiphany brought a communal pot of stew, the villagers sharing a cask of ale, their faces lit by candlelight, their voices raised in a hymn that echoed through the snow. The children, wide-eyed, listened to stories of miracles, wells that refused to freeze, harvests that lasted through spring, saints who warmed frozen hands, their imaginations a refuge from the cold. The village was a living entity, its strength drawn from the collective will to survive, each act of kindness a spark in the darkness. The season's rituals were woven into the fabric of survival. The slaughter of a pig, a communal event, was both practical and ceremonial. The meat shared among families, the blood saved for puddings, the bones boiled for broth, the hide tanned for shoes or belts. Edric led the slaughter, his knife steady, his voice calm as he thanked the animal for its sacrifice. The villagers gathered around, their breath steaming in the cold. The women's spinning wheels hummed through the night, producing yarn for socks, scarves, mittens, or blankets that would shield against the cold. Eliana spun wool by the fire, her spindle a blur, her thoughts on her children's warmth. The men, their hands rough from axes, saws, and ploughs, carved wooden spoons, bowls, or toys, their work a silent vow to see their families through. Wulfric carved a small boat for Beorn, its sails a scrap of cloth, his brother's smile a rare reward. Even the dogs, lean and watchful, played their part, guarding the livestock from wolves, barking at the approach of strangers, or curling up beside children to share warmth. The village's cats, though half wild, kept rats from the grain, their silent hunts a quiet contribution to survival. The community found strength in small acts of creativity. Ethelfled braided her sister's hair with dried flowers saved from summer, a touch of beauty in the grey days. Wulfric carved a whistle from a hazel branch, its shrill notes a fleeting joy, his laughter echoing as Beorn tried to blow it. Agnes told riddles to keep minds sharp, her voice weaving puzzles that distracted from hunger, her eyes twinkling as the children guessed wrong. The village held impromptu gatherings where a single musician, a boy with a reed pipe, a woman with a drum, or an elder with a cracked voice, might lead a song that echoed through the snow, their music a defiance of the cold. These moments, though fleeting, were lifelines, proof that the human spirit could endure even the darkest days. But resilience was tested by loss. When Alwyn's fever worsened, Hilda's remedies failed, and he slipped away one bitter night. His death a blow to the village. Eliana wept as she helped wrap his body, her hands trembling as she thought of Beorn's fragility. The village gathered to dig his grave, their hands blistered from the frozen earth, their silence heavy with grief. Yet they carried on, their shared loss a reminder of their shared strength, their determination a fire that burned brighter than the cold. The hard-won dawn of spring. When the first signs of spring emerged, a patch of bare earth where snow had melted, a trickle of water from the thawing thorn, a bud on a barren branch, a faint green haze on the hills, Thornwick stirred with cautious joy. These were not mere changes, but miracles, proof of survival against a relentless foe. The air softened, carrying the faint scent of damp earth, new grass, and the first tentative blooms. Snowdrops peeking through the frost, their white petals a promise of renewal. Birds, absent for months, returned with hesitant songs, larks trilling, sparrows chirping, the distant call of a cuckoo, their notes a promise of warmer days. The villagers, gaunt but unbowed, emerged from their homes, Their faces turned to the sun like pilgrims greeting a holy relic, their eyes squinting against the unaccustomed light. Their bodies bore the marks of winter, cracked skin, hollow cheeks, weary eyes, hands roughened by cold and labor. But their spirits were unbroken, their survival a quiet triumph. Spring cleaning swept away the gloom. Homes were aired out, their smoky interiors cleansed by breezes that carried the chill of winter's last breath. Eliana scrubbed floors with brooms of bound twigs, swept out old straw, and replaced it with fresh rushes that smelled of green fields. Her hands red from the cold water, her laughter mingling with Ethelfled's as they worked. Men repaired walls and roofs damaged by snow, their hammers echoing as they drove new pegs into timber, their muscles aching but eager for the work of renewal. Edric cleared paths, shoveled away the last drifts, and sharpened ploughs for the fields, his eyes bright with the promise of planting. The fields beckoned, demanding seeds, sweat, and hope, and the survivors answered with a vigor born of necessity and longing. Children ran through the fields, their energy a contrast to the stillness of winter, their laughter a celebration of life reclaimed. Wulfric and Ethelfled chased newborn lambs, splashed in muddy streams, or gathered the first wildflowers, snowdrops, primroses, violets, their small bouquets a symbol of renewal, their shouts echoing through the valley. The livestock, those that had survived, were led out to graze on the first patches of grass, their ribs stark beneath their hides but their eyes bright with the promise of spring. Bess lowed contentedly, her milk flowing again, a relief to Cineberg, who kissed her son's forehead as he drank. The women planted kitchen gardens, sowing seeds of peas, leeks and herbs, their hands gentle in the thawed soil, their voices singing as they worked. Eliana showed Ethelfled how to plant parsley, their fingers brushing the earth, their shared task a moment of hope. The men turned the fields, their ploughs cutting through earth still cold but yielding, each furrow a step toward the next harvest. Edric, his hands steady on the plough, felt the earth's pulse beneath his feet, his heart lifting with each turn. The elderly, like Agnes, their strength spent, but their wisdom vital, advised on planting times, pointing out the stars or the angle of the sun that signaled the right moment, their voices a guide for the younger generation. The community celebrated spring's arrival with small but heartfelt rituals. A bonfire was lit in the village square, its flames a farewell to the cold, its warmth a promise of renewal. The villagers gathered around, their faces lit by the glow. Father Cedric led a blessing of the fields, sprinkling holy water on the soil as the villagers prayed for a bountiful harvest, their voices rising in a hymn that carried across the valley. The children wove garlands of twigs and early blooms, crowning each other in playful ceremonies that echoed ancient rites, their laughter a song of survival. The women baked the first fresh bread of the season, its crust soft, and its scent a stark contrast to the stale loaves of winter, the villagers sharing it with smiles. The men shared a cask of ale saved for spring, its taste a toast to survival, their voices raised in thanks. These moments, though simple, were profound, a collective exhale after months of holding their breath. The medieval winter was a forge that tempered human resolve. It taught preparation. Every log stacked, every grain stored, every stitch sewn was a bulwark against the cold. It taught endurance, as families faced hunger, illness, isolation, and loss with a stoicism born of necessity. It taught ingenuity, as they crafted tools, remedies, games, and stories to outwit the season's cruelty. It taught faith, as they clung to prayers and rituals that promised light in the darkness. And above all, it taught the power of shared humanity, as neighbors became kin, their survival intertwined in the face of a common foe. The legacy of winter was not merely survival but transformation, a testament to the unyielding spirit that waits, through the darkest seasons, for the inevitable dawn of spring. Thornwick, scarred but stronger, emerged as a community forged in the crucible of winter, its bonds as enduring as the earth itself, its people ready to face the cycle anew, knowing that winter would return, but so too would spring.